Do you know the name Ismail al-Faruqi? If you're a Muslim and you've never heard of him, that's no accident, because in the 20th century, no Muslim thinker was more quietly erased than this man. His ideas were sharp, his vision was strategic, and his mission was nothing less than the intellectual liberation of the Muslim world. And that made him dangerous. He and his wife were brutally murdered, stabbed to death in their own home on US soil, under bizarre and disturbing circumstances. And just like that, his name faded. But the truth he carried hasn't gone anywhere. Dr. Ismail al-Faruqi was a highly prominent and accomplished academic whose credentials, achievements, and global influence placed him among the leading Muslim intellectuals of the 20th century. He understood something most Muslims still overlook. Real power today doesn't come from money or politics alone. It comes from controlling ideas. Ideas that are built into institutions, turned into policies, and embedded in culture. Whoever controls that stream of ideas controls the future. Let me explain what that actually means. Muslim organizations in the UK and Canada are doing important work. Groups like CAGE in the UK and NCCM, National Council of Canadian Muslims in Canada, have been effective in advocacy, legal defense, and public awareness, but they are not full-scale policy institutions with upstream influence. Even groups like the Muslim Institute, which publishes essays and hosts discussions, fall short of producing the kind of high-level, data-driven policy work that can shape government decisions or media narratives. Their publications often lack the academic rigor, strategic clarity, and institutional reach needed to influence policymakers. These organizations are doing vital frontline or discursive work, but they're not setting national agendas or shaping long-term cultural frameworks. A real institution isn't an advocacy group or a part-time initiative. It's a serious, structured body with long-term funding, full-time staff, professional researchers, strategic goals, and access to policymakers and media. It produces data, publishes reports, holds conferences, builds networks, and trains experts. Real institutions like Chatham House in the UK or the Monk School of Global Affairs in Canada influence law, culture, and public thought, not through noise but through authority. And Muslims have none. To understand how influence works, take the concept of unconscious bias in psychology. How did a niche academic idea become a term everyone now uses? It started as a research theory, just an idea explored in studies and academic papers, but through conferences, publications, and institutional support, it spread into corporate training programs, school curriculums, HR departments, and even government policy. Today, it shapes how millions of people think and behave, often without ever having seen the original research. That's the power of upstream influence. That's how upstream power works. A small group plants an idea, nurtures it through institutional work, and eventually rewires how society sees the world. Al-Faruqi knew this. That's why he focused not on protest, but on building. He wanted Muslims to shape reality, not just react to it. Now take the case of Islamophobia. Despite being a real and devastating force that affects millions of Muslims, fueling genocides, mass surveillance, hate crimes, and constant media vilification, it never followed the institutional route that turns a social crisis into protected policy. There are no powerful Muslim think tanks producing policy recommendations, no legal bodies consistently tracking data, and no cultural institutions shaping the narrative. Up until today, Muslims don't even have the upstream institutions to define Islamophobia properly, let alone push it through legal or political channels. The think tanks don't exist, and that's why the policies don't either. What's shocking is that Islamophobia is still mostly fought through protests, hashtags, and reactive journalism. There is no coordinated body to define it clearly, measure its impact, or demand legal reform. So while anti-Semitism and racism have dedicated task forces, legal protections, and media sensitivity protocols, Islamophobia remains vague, often dismissed as a personal complaint rather than a systemic threat. And, ironically, instead of building the institutions needed to fight it, much of the Muslim world continues to pour its focus and financial support into mosques, charities, and organizations that have no political or strategic influence. Muslims often turn to popular preachers, media influencers, or political figures as their leaders, believing that charisma, online platforms, or even military strength are the keys to revival. Figures like Mufti Menk, Numan Ali Khan, Omar Suleiman, Yasir Qadi, and Hamza Yusuf all offer spiritual guidance, emotional comfort, and much-needed public visibility. But none of them are building the kind of institutional power needed to shift policy, shape law, or influence how Islam is perceived at the highest levels. And that's exactly the problem, because the battlefield today isn't the media or the front lines of a military conflict. It's the intellectual landscape. Until Muslims understand that real power lies in shaping worldviews, crafting narratives, and writing the rules, not just reacting to them, they will keep mistaking visibility for influence and emotion for strategy. This is why Muslims today remain trapped in what can only be called the cycle of reactive politics. It's a predictable loop. An event occurs, a ban, an insult, or an act of violence against Muslims. Outrage erupts, protests follow, the incident trends on social media. A brief moment of media attention flickers, and then inevitably silence. If society were a Hollywood movie, Muslims today are still stuck fighting for a spot in the audition room, while the script, the cast, and even the ending were written without them. They have no presence behind the scenes, no writers, no directors, no producers. At best, they're background characters used for dramatic effect. At worst, they're completely erased from the story. Let's look at a real example to see exactly how this plays out. In 2023, Michaela Community School in London, where roughly half the students are Muslim, banned all visible prayer rituals on campus after an increasing number of students began praying during lunch. A Muslim student challenged the policy in court, arguing that it violated her right to religious freedom. But in April 2024, the High Court ruled against her, siding with the school's secular ethos. The judge argued that she had enrolled knowing the school's rules, could make up the prayer later, or simply choose a different school. While the court may have upheld the school's right to enforce uniformity, the decision was morally and constitutionally flawed. It directly undermines the very secular principles it claims to protect. This ruling effectively punished a student for exercising her basic religious duty and sent a dangerous message. That religious expression, particularly Islamic practice, is unwelcome in public institutions. However, this reflects a broader structural issue. Muslims have little to no upstream power in law, education, or media, and without it, even basic rights like prayer can be denied under the guise of neutrality. This is exactly what al-Faruqi warned about, that Muslims would become spectators in the arena of ideas, reacting emotionally but never shaping the rules of the game. He didn't just talk about reforming Islam, he diagnosed the real disease. Muslims were living under systems built by others, thinking in categories shaped by Western secularism, and trying to survive in structures that were never designed for them. He understood that without reclaiming the power to produce knowledge, real upstream power, Muslims would always be intellectually colonized, politically weak, and culturally lost. Al-Faruqi launched a project called Islamization of Knowledge, which meant rethinking every academic field, history, economics, sociology, even science, from an Islamic worldview. That terrified people. Because if Muslims started producing knowledge on their own terms, they wouldn't just resist oppression, they'd become civilizational competitors again. His work wasn't about nostalgia, it was about crucial strategy. He knew that real power lies in defining reality, not just living in someone else's version of it. And that made him a threat, not because he was violent, but because he was clear, organized, and visionary, and that's exactly why no one teaches you his name. On May 27, 1986, Dr. Ismail al-Faruqi and his wife, Lois Lamia al-Faruqi, were brutally murdered in their home in Wyncote, Pennsylvania, a crime that remains as shocking as it is bizarre. Both were stabbed multiple times in their sleep with a military-style survival knife, and their pregnant daughter was also attacked, but miraculously survived after crawling to a phone to call for help. There was no forced entry, no theft, and no clear explanation for why two respected intellectuals focused on education, interfaith dialogue, and institution building would be targeted in such a savage way. His death was not just the end of a man, it marked the silencing of a vision that was far ahead of its time. Until Muslims understand what he meant, until they recover his vision, they will keep mistaking emotional reaction for strategic action and survival for success. If this is the first time you're hearing this, that's exactly the problem. Awareness is the first step toward change, like follow and share, because more people need to understand why Muslims are where they are today.